Dr. Edith Shiro. So great to have you here. We need some clarity. Today we need clarity. We need to understand this is the first step to forgive in many ways. So thank you for coming. Thank you for joining this series focused on collective trauma and collective well-being. So as you know, because you are part of the board of the World Happiness Foundation, we are truly focused on bringing hope, on bringing clarity, light, with no judgment, in a space where we help many professionals to flourish and to get supported. Because if we talk about teachers, if we at the school in the school system, if we talk about psychologists, if we talk about health professionals and government leaders and managers, they need support. And especially when we witness so much suffering going on today in the world. And this is the focus of these conversations that we are going to have. So thank you so much for joining. Edith, let me introduce yourself just briefly. Clinical psychologist, but you've been working on trauma and post-traumatic growth for many, many years. You have an incredible book, The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, highly recommended for everybody watching this webinar. Yeah, you know, I have the improved.
I know. I'll give you the other one also. Dedicated.
But I mean, if there is somebody in the world that understands what suffering is and why we suffer, it's you. So welcome, and let's understand what are the basics of trauma and suffering. What is the difference? So we have the full talk context. And then I think that today we want to focus on growing from trauma. We all know a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder. So we get stress and stress disorders after trauma. But as you highlight in your book and your research, we can grow as much as we are under stress and we suffer. So let's explore how we do that. So what is growth? What is suffering? What is trauma? What can we do now for so many people witnessing so much trauma and so much suffering going on in the world in order to relieve and to feel better?
Luis, thank you so much for this invitation. And, you know, like always, being upfront in the World Happiness Foundation. And of course, I'm so proud I'm part of the board and I'm part of all this beautiful project and purpose of like really opening for conversation, which is one of the most important things that we can do when we are in crisis, when we are in what we're living right now, which is collective trauma. And I want to also make sure that when we talk about trauma and suffering, that we not only talk about the individual, but we're very clear that it's collective, that is systemic, that this is not just happening to one person or one family or one group, but it's really touching upon hundreds and thousands of groups, cultures, societies, communities, and really the human beings, right? There's a lot of talk about humanity and inhumanity and dehumanizing. So it's us as a group, as a system, and how we're understanding this. So to also I know everybody knows what trauma is, but I just want to remind everybody, trauma is any event for which we don't have the resources, the tools, or the capacity to deal with, to confront, to face, and that shatters our belief system about ourselves, about others, and about the world. So when something like this happens, what's happening now in the world, with a war in the Middle East, in Israel, like what happened with the pandemic, like what happened with the war in Ukraine, like what's happened in many other instances, somehow we are touched with this sense of uncertainty, of unpredictability, and of the notion that however we understood the world and how it functions, how safe it is, how we relate to one another, and what we believe about ourselves, about our identity, about our place in the world is being in question. It's being questioned, it's being shattered, it's being shaken. And that creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression and a lot of trauma responses. So when that happens to a person, that's difficult. When that happens to a culture, that's even, multiplied and amplified because it has ripple effects to everywhere. So why are we talking about collective trauma right now? Even if we're not in Israel, let's say, even if we're not Israelis or Palestinians or anybody related to what's happening in the moment. I see this in my office every day, and I see this with the groups of people that I work with right here, right now, which is that people are going through a vicarious trauma into a re-traumatization. This is a typical thing what happens with trauma. When we experience something difficult or we are exposed, as we are now, with so many images of violence and aggression and anxiety and threatening situations and people running for their lives and really massacres and suffering in such an extensive way, we somehow, the way that our brain works is that it becomes alert to danger. This is a very basic biological reaction for survival. Our whole nervous system gets in alert. It becomes triggered to say, hey, what's happening here? Should I be on guard? What am I being threatened? Is danger coming up? Is the dinosaur coming in to eat me up, or the lion in the jungle? So all the alarms are turned on in our body, and we are on alert system just by seeing images, just by listening to, sounds of anger or desperation or anxiety or fear, right? And what it does is that it touches, this is the interesting part, that it touches upon our own traumas, our own individual personal traumas. So if let me give you the example that is happening right now in the US. If I'm a Venezuelan that is running for my life because in my own country I have no food, I have no shelter, and I'm just crossing the border, right, and being persecuted, and I finally, let's say, get to a place in the United States when I'm safe for a while, and then I hear what's happening in Israel, all of my traumas for being an immigrant or for being a refugee or for running away from my own country that has nothing to do with Israel turn on and are triggered, and then I begin to experience that very trauma, and I begin to have that anxiety, that fear, that scary feeling, that threatening feeling and uncertainty, which I had from my own past experience. If I suffer a lot of loss during the pandemic, if the pandemic 3 years ago was something that I was struggling with and it was really difficult and I was isolated and I had people dying around me, and then I connect with what's happening in Israel, then that trauma gets triggered. If I had somebody in my own life that when I got divorced or somebody died in my life or I've been rejected or bullied or, abandoned, all these things, it's like a match that, you light one match and it lights every other match in that box. That's why I think it's very important for all of us to be talking about this, because yes, it does have to do with you. It has everything to do with you. If you are Israeli or you're Palestinian or you're related to anybody there or not, we are all touched by what's happening. And I want to say one more thing about that. When we talk about collective trauma, and I have beautiful people around me, also colleagues that talk about that, Thomas Hubel, Laura Calderon, Jack Soul, people that are really embarked and committed to working with communities and cultures that, on trauma. We are all responsible for what's happening right now. When we understand that what happens on the other side of the world has everything to do with us and makes us be aware of what is our contribution, right, for the suffering, and also our contribution for the healing, then we can open a different kind of conversation, Luis. You know, one of the things that I've been seeing this week and last week is that I have kids coming to my office and people coming to my office talking about this as if it was a football game. It's like, okay, on what side are you in? How many points? Who's winning? Who's losing? And right. And I say that with a lot of compassion to say that trauma creates division, fragmentation, isolation, and polarization. This is precisely what happens. When something like a crisis happens, suffering happens, people take sides, people become more extreme. It's like a bomb has fallen and everybody runs for their lives to their own corner, right? And that's one way of responding. And that's why you see this kind of polarization. I'm either on this team or on that team. Sometimes it's the way that we learn how to respond to this from a trauma response, right? When we are not healed, this is how we respond.
So sorry, yes, please.
Go ahead. And I say that like at a small level. In a marriage, if there's a marriage and there's a child that has a problem, the marriage either becomes very, very close and they become a team and they unite even more, or they completely separate and the marriage is almost usually over, because the level of trauma and the level of suffering is so high that you do either one or the other.
So this is very profound, because if at the core of division, at the core of polarization, at the core of survival, we have the bomb of trauma, the way we are behaving and taking decisions today in the world doesn't help our healing, because we are taking decisions in many ways to actually keep the source of trauma very close. And at the same time, we are separating from a psychological point of view. So it looks like from a material point of view, from a physical point of view, we are forcing people to stay together. But from a psychological point of view, they are divergent. They are completely separated. Can that happen?
Yes. And the reason why that happens is that we carry traumas from generations and generations, from our ancestors, from our own even individual lives that we have no awareness and we have not healed. So that's why, for example, one of the things that we say in the World Happiness Foundation is that consciousness is a fundamental tool and pillar, and value to really live your life. You have to take responsibility to live your life with consciousness, because the more you are unaware of your own trauma, the more you're going to repeat it. Part of what happens in big conflict, like what we're living now in Israel, but really in any conflict in a family, really, when we talk about families and the kids are fighting with each other, or the partners, in the family are fighting with each other, the level of abuse, the level of disrespect, the level of conflict is equally proportionate to the level of trauma that everybody has lived in their history. And sometimes it's in their childhood, but sometimes it's in their ancestors. And I say that, with a lot of conviction, because I am a daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, right? I know what intergenerational trauma is, which is extremely important to understand, that whatever we do now has repercussions for generations and generations. So right now, I'm worried about the children that are in Israel, Palestinian, Israeli, whichever color, size, shape, or form, because these are the children that are living the trauma that is going to continue the vicious cycle for the next few generations, and then we don't stop it. And there's no stopping of that trauma, right? And only when we are aware that we're responding from that wound, from that suffering, in which it makes us say, I want to fight with you more. I want to be separate from you. I'm going to polarize with you because I have my own wounds and you have your own, and we're not attending to each other. Then there's very, very hard. It's very hard to then go through healing. It's only when we have, and I'm going to enter into the healing process step number one, the recognition, the validation, and the acknowledgement of those wounds. I always start with that when we talk about collective healing or individual healing or family healing, because the question is, okay, what do we do with all of this, right? How do we transform this, which is really what I always want to bring when we talk about trauma. How do we transform all of this suffering, all of this pain into well-being, into hope, into growth? So we really start, yes.
Yeah, but just the first step of healing becomes so difficult for so many people. I mean, look at all the immigrants coming to the United States through the border. It's about millions of people right now. Look at the catastrophes, natural catastrophes that are going on in Afghanistan. Look at Ukraine, Russia, and all Europe, basically, especially Poland, with so many refugees, but many of the countries accommodating so many refugees coming from Ukraine. Look at what's going on in East Africa, West Africa, Middle Africa, in so many, at least 8 countries with conflicts open. Look at what's going on the streets of Washington or LA with refugees on the streets suffering mental health. I mean, when you look at all these communities exposed to trauma at scale, something that we've seen is that we become victims and we see ourselves as victims of the system or somebody else. And the moment we do that, we don't accept the situation. So it's the opposite of you were saying, is radical acceptance and in this case, what we are doing is, no, I don't accept at all what's going on, and I am a victim of somebody else. I mean, these are a lot of people. We are talking about millions and millions of people in the world who feel like victims. That's a collective victimism that we have today in the world. What do we do?
Exactly. No, small question right there, just a little thing. But that's why, for example, the work of Gabor Mate, who's an amazing psychiatrist that works on trauma, that really touches on trauma in a very, very wise and very precise way. He just published his book called The Myth of Normal. And part of why he says is that we live in a world that we think it's normal, like that. And I say normal in quotes. But really what we're doing is constantly being in trauma response. We have normalized trauma as a way of living on our everyday life. And this is what happens. We get dissociated and disconnected from the suffering around us. We see all this victimhood, or we see all this discrimination that happens at all levels, and we think that's normal response. And really what it is the consequence of years and years and years of trauma that has not been resolved, of colonization, of oppression, of rejection, of discrimination that has not been resolved. So it's a big question, and I know this is a very difficult thing to do, to begin to say, acknowledge and recognize and validate the suffering of the other and the suffering of the people that are going through something that you might not agree with, right? Because part of what happens here is the tolerance to difference, tolerance to diversity, tolerance to a different way of thinking, being, living, and we're not there yet. We're becoming less tolerant. And one of the things that I think contributes, and I always put this little comment, but I think it's very important, is that our social media and our technology, especially for kids and young adults, teenagers, has been fundamental in reinforcing this numbness and desensitization for the suffering of others. So one of the things that makes us human, one of the things that makes us connect with the other, even if they're different, is empathy and compassion. Empathy and compassion is one of the main things that has been lacking with our with our young generations. Not because they're not born with that, it's because they're growing up in front of screens, playing video games, as you know, that are very, very, very violent and aggressive. So that desensitizes the person from the suffering of the other. So the same thing that is happening in the screen, in the video game, in their phones, then they go and behave in those ways on their everyday life, the way they, kids bully each other, the way we use social media without accountability to respond, to attack, to discriminate others and to be violent with others, is because this is part of how we've been raised, with no compassion and no empathy. And that's why I think another part of this healing process is, how do we validate, acknowledge, and recognize? How do we connect with our own feelings of empathy and compassion for ourselves first and for others? We don't even have it for our own selves, right? That's part of the healing process that we need to think of.
So why don't we go deeper into the healing process? We have a few minutes to go into the phases of that process before something that we've been exploring as well in the collective, and especially from a sociological point of view in the community, is that the sense of injustice creates anger. And that anger can be expanded very quickly if we reinforce that basically with facts, and they can be fake or they can be real, this sense of injustice. So injustice and anger are completely interconnected. And I feel that if some people believe they are victims of any system, they see the injustice, they sense that injustice, and they create this feeling of anger, then they have to do something with the anger.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how do you feel about that process? Victimization, injustice, anger, and then from there, it's very difficult to manage. How do you manage that third step, or how do you manage not to escalate to that level?
Yeah, no, I understand. And really, I don't have all the answers. I can tell you, from my experience, what I've seen happens in that transformation. So when the person is in that state of anger and that state of victimization, that state of really like touching rock bottom, the first thing that they do is, or the first thing to do is to recognize that this is what's happening to them, that radical acceptance that, yes, I'm in anger. I feel the injustice. I am going through this situation, or, this is affecting me. Like what's happening right now is affecting me. I am traumatized. So all these things have to be radically accepted, because usually what happens is that we disconnect from them, we dissociate, we run away, we avoid all this kind of stuff with behaviors that are addiction. A lot of people that are in anger, they go to alcohol, drugs, and other, addictive behaviors to numb the anger, right? We see that all the time, because a lot of the times is what's behind the addiction is a lot of anger, a lot of suffering, a lot of trauma that has not been taken care of. We see that all the time with people that are in prisons, with people that are in all kinds of environments. But so that's number one, radical acceptance. Then the second step is safety and protection. The safety and protection means that you are capable of reaching out to someone else, to a organization, a person, a family, a space, a group that holds you, that can hold you in a way that you can begin to express authentically and truthfully how you feel. It's when you begin to put into words that anger. And yes, that anger comes out, and comes out raw, and it comes out ugly, and it comes out with fury, right? And when you do that in a space that can contain it, it's perfectly fine because there are no consequences in the outside world. That's extremely healing for people that are going through this injustice. That doesn't mean that the injustice has been solved, but it means that you can overcome the anger or process that anger or process that anxiety or process that depression in order to deal with the real thing. Because anger and depression, anxiety are the symptoms that are really manifesting what's deep, which is that hurt. Because what's injustice is being hurt of not being recognized, of not being seen, of not being respected, of being humiliated and shamed. And that touches on our basic core of us as human beings. Being a human being requires a level of respect, a level of acknowledgement, of recognition, of being seen somehow as a human, right? Somebody has to see you, somebody has to say you exist, and somebody has to give you like basic somehow love and respect for you to continue. Otherwise, it really festers and it becomes all these other manifestations of deep depression, deep anger. Yes.
Yeah, actually, when we see in working environments, what are the key drivers for happiness and well-being? At the top is appreciation. So appreciation is about seeing the other. So appreciation, and that's okay. Yeah, but here that we are talking about collective trauma and collective well-being, imagine, I mean, you are talking about phase one is acceptance. So I have to accept, which means that I have to learn how to stop being a victim somehow. No, you don't need that.
No, because what it means is that you radically accept how you are feeling. Like you put words and name to what's happening to you in the moment. You can say, I am a victim, or I feel like a victim.
Feel like a victim.
Yeah.
So by recognizing that you are a victim, that you feel like a victim, that's the first step, right?
Yes, that's going to change, but at least recognizing where you are at with like the most reality, the most truthfulness, and really truly connected with what's happening when you in the moment.
Okay.
Without running away from it.
Yeah, this is so interesting. What happens if you don't have any possibility for security and safety?
Exactly.
What happens?
Right. So this is a big question because of what's happening right now, Luis. I think this big question of, can we heal while we're still in trauma?
Exactly.
The example is not just there's a war in Israel and we're all feeling traumatized. Yes, that's what's happening right now. But I can give you examples that are also every day. Kids that are being bullied in school every day. Women that are being abused and treated badly every day in their relationships. Immigrants that are trying to, run for their lives and save themselves, and they're not finding a shelter. These are all examples that its trauma is in the moment. So in my experience, I know it's a big question, and I'm only going to give you what I've seen all these years, because that question has come up many times when I talk, and it's, can you heal while you're still in the trauma experience? My answer from what I've seen is no. No, it's very, very, very difficult to heal, to start this healing process while the trauma is still going on. You and I were listening to one of the videos that Gabor Mate, just to mention him, was put out yesterday, the day before, and he gave an example of a woman that is working with Palestinian children that are in jail. And she's trying to go there to help, right? But there's no helping and getting these children out of trauma. The only thing she can do is do meditation, singing, dancing, and make it as tolerable as possible. This is when a person is being bullied all day long, where they're being discriminated because they're of their race, when a person is being sexually abused every day or emotionally abused every day. What do? The only thing you can do is develop tools to tolerate and survive that trauma that you're going through every day. This is when people develop chronic illnesses, PTSD, all kinds of mechanisms that allow them to survive, but they're still in the trauma experience, in the trauma moment. So from what I've seen, you really have to get out of the trauma first, out of the war, out of the abuse, out of the bullying, to begin this process of healing. While that is going on, it's very difficult.
Yeah, but this is so important, because if we collectively, and especially we saw that with COVID, as humanity are traumatized. So how are we going to move to the next level of healing when we are in trauma?
Right, but let me make that distinction. One thing is when the event of the trauma is happening, it's like the house is on fire. So the fire is happening. That's a trauma event. So while the house is on fire, it's very, very hard to heal and relax and really, not be afraid of it, because you're in the fire. When the healing can happen is while you're out of that house on fire and you're traumatized. So I'm not saying you're not traumatized. Yes, you are traumatized. You have all the consequences of trauma. You're very, very affected by it, but you're out of the fire. So let's make that distinction. While you're in it, is not possible. You have to be out of it.
No, yeah, but but in this case, I completely agree with that. But I'm feeling that, especially over the last 10, 12 years, we are getting into an crescendo of traumas and suffering because of the interconnectedness of information around the world.
Exactly.
So now is the Surfside building collapsing, but is the hurricane coming, but is the killings in Ukraine is about. So we are being bombarded in so many ways by so much information. We are witnessing so much suffering that it's like the house is on fire all the time.
Yes. Yes, and that's why we're seeing so much of the symptoms that we didn't see before. From a mental health perspective, the levels of suicide attempts, of depression, of the levels of panic attacks, of this, people not knowing what to do with their life, of lack of motivation, indifference, of like physical, chronic pains. These are all things that have been increasing as well. So there are, yes, I agree, there are manifestations of everything that we're seeing more and more and more. Yes.
So actually, Samdu Chetri, who is on the board as well, amazing. He's watching, and he's saying, I think making friends with trauma by being aware and accepting it, we can make the first step to understanding and talking to it. So is that probably one step, making friends with trauma when we are going to be traumatized for the rest of our lives?
Exactly. No, not necessarily. I don't think for the rest of our lives, but yes, making friends with trauma is this radical acceptance step. Is this first step of radical acceptance. And Samdu, thank you so much for that comment, because that's exactly what I mean by radical acceptance, is making friends, sit with what's happening with you, face it, accept it, embrace it. And that's how you enter that process of healing. And yes, it's not easy, but it's possible and it's doable. And that's why the message here is a message of hope, because I've seen this happen over and over and over, not only individually, but collectively, in groups, in communities, and cultures, in which when you are able to begin this and go through, there's like a light at the end of the tunnel.
We've talked many times about the role of resilience in all this. What is your view on resilience for growth post-trauma or during trauma?
Yes. So one of the things that happens when you go through this healing process is that you can get to that place of post-traumatic growth, which is the positive effects, the positive consequences after going through adversity, the opportunities of growing, of creating new possibilities, new meaning in your life after going through suffering. So what happens is that sometimes people that are very resilient, which is wonderful and great, is that people that have all these tools and all these capacities to face difficulty, they do well and they bounce back, which is the concept of resilience. Resilience is the capacity to bounce back from a difficulty or adversity or something that happens to you. And that's a wonderful thing to have. I do want to say that when we have when we face problems with resilience, we stay in the place where we are and we keep going the things to stay in a stable, safe place. But we don't grow. We don't grow. Because for growth to happen and for this very, very meaningful, transformational, transcendent experience, there's something that breaks usually. There's something that we go deep in the depth of our emotions and of our core and of who we are, that shakes us, that shatters our something, core in who we are, that allows us to redefine our very identity, our existence, and the way that we relate to the world. And that's when growth happens. So I'm not against being resilient. I think it's wonderful and great, but usually that prevents growth from happening. So as you go through the process of growth and you get to post-traumatic growth, you develop resilience. So next time you go through trauma, of course, you're going to be more protected and you're going to be more capable. One of the big things that we see is that these are protective factors for future trauma. So moving along in the 5 stages. First stage, radical acceptance. Second stage, safety and protection, which means, yes, finding a place that is safe. And I know that's very easy to say and very hard to do. That's why, for example, organizations like Truth and Reconciliation, organizations, that create more consciousness, more safety to have conversations, conflict resolutions. And Luis, I know you've been with groups like that, right? Like it's opening space, safe space to talk and to express and to share, which is really, really important and really, really healing. And then the third stage is the stage of new narratives, is the stage of really opening up for a new way of thinking, a new way of being, a new way, considering new possibilities that weren't considered before. It's this opening of your mind and opening of your life that you said, wow, I didn't know the world was this big. I didn't know all these were possibilities. Sometimes people do that by doing psychedelics. Psychedelic treatment sometimes is a way of people describe us like, wow, it really opened my mind. It cracked my mind open. Now I can see things in a very different way. I can make connections in a different way. For some people, it's going through a meditation retreat. Some other people, they start having more of a spiritual beliefs. For some other people, it's like they move to a different country. So, people try out new things. This is in a collective healing would be in Israel to say, hey, how about looking at this conflict from a completely different lens? How about we, consider other possibilities? How about we see this 2 brothers, siblings fighting, and how we as parents and as a family are going to contribute to the end of the conflict in the family. And we're all going to, contribute to the peace. And, I know I wish, these are my idealistic wishes, but, this is why I propose to do some healing in a collective way as well. And then the 4th stage is the stage of integration. What does that mean? That means that you're able to consider new things without letting go of your history. So you're able to look at your past traumas and your past conflicts, but without having the reaction of the trauma. You're able to integrate it into who you are. You have the old and the new, and you have the continuity of all the ancestors and all the generations that have come to say, yeah, I bring you all the goodies and all the wisdom and all the good stuff that we can integrate into right now, right here. And then the 5th stage, which is the stage of wisdom and growth, in which people begin to understand their lives and their relationships from a more meaningful place. There's more appreciation for life. There's strengthened relationships. There's people usually talk about having a clarity of purpose, like a clear mission in life. Usually this is when people have developed more spiritually, and very interesting research on spirituality, in which even there's a part of the brain we found that gets thickened, and it really becomes a protective factor against future trauma. So becoming more spiritual, that doesn't mean religious, more spiritual, allows us to face the future trauma with more understanding and more faith that you can overcome it better. And these are all gifts that we get when we really go through this process.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one, because the deeper you go into spirituality, the deeper you get into non-duality. And non-duality is no separation. So instead of justifying why a separation exists, you go deeper and say, well, there is no separation. So this is something that is not happening. So what we have to actually analyze is why people feel that we are separated when we are not. So I think that spiritual path is very important. And that's part of the research that we do as part of the chair that we have on contemplative science. And as part of the board, we have many leaders going deeper into the neuroscience, the sociology, psychology, and the philosophy of spirituality, which goes beyond religion in many ways. So let me summary a bit what we are learning today for everybody, especially with the 5 phases. So at some point, when we are aware that we are going through trauma, the first step is to accept the feeling. Because this is very interesting. This is something I learned. It's not just accepting the situation. You accept the feeling that you are having in that moment because of the situation. So that's kind of the first step. The second is actually to get into safety and security. So this is why I feel that what we are doing with the World Happiness Foundation is very important, because we are creating safety nets and secure bases for healers or for professionals in order to do their job. But as well, we are trying to inspire and bring hope to everybody who says, okay, actually with these people and the way they are working, we can feel safe and secure. Then the third one was beautiful. And you talk about building new narratives, is seeing things from a different perspective. And that requires imagination. But that's a big one. And the fourth one is that once you start building that new reality, you integrate that in your daily life. And you say, oh, actually, what's going on now with these 2 siblings in the Middle East is something that has to be solved with the whole family. So at some point, there should be somebody. And from my point of view, is the United Nations. That's why we have the United Nations, that can really become the peacemaker and make sense of what's going on, separating and bringing together, but doing this in a neutral way. So this is, I'm bringing my conflict resolution hat when I think of integration. And then you get to a stage of 5th stage, which is beautiful, of growth and wisdom. So those are 5 stages, beautiful. And all those 5 are in this amazing book, The Unexpected Grief of Trauma. So if somebody feels that is going through trauma and suffering, please get this book, because it actually is a gift. Why is a gift, Edith? Why trauma is a gift?
It's a gift because why the book is a gift and trauma is a gift because it really brings hope to people. When people think we're in trauma, they think that this is a life sentence, and people think, oh, there's no getting out of this one. And I have good news. There is getting out of this one, and not only getting out, but really getting out more transform growth, really to another level, to really a more beautiful, more meaningful place. And I think that's worth considering, because it brings hope not just for you, but really for the people around you that might be going through something difficult, for the client or the group or the patient that you're working with, for the kids that you're teaching or that you're organizing, for the companies. It really brings a message of hope. It gives language also to say, this is the stage that I'm in, this is where I'm going through the process. It allows people to say, oh, there's a way out. This is not just, a button or a thing that I go in and out, but there's a process of growth, a process of healing that we're capable of. Sometimes it's important to remember that we as our bodies are very, very wise. We have the capacity to heal. Sometimes when we are going through difficulty, we need to have the patience, the understanding, and allow our bodies and our souls and our emotions to take care of ourselves, because we can get out of the trauma if we nurture it, if we get into the safe spaces. We don't have to develop a post-traumatic stress disorder. That doesn't happen all the time. Yes, we go through suffering. We acknowledge the suffering. Yes, it's there. But it also is true that we can rely on the wisdom of the body to get us out of it. And then if we push forward, we use it almost like a trampoline, almost like an effect to leap forward to the next level of growth. And that's why I think these are important things to consider, to know that this is possible.
So with all this in mind, do you have any practical recommendations for people who are suffering, being re-traumatized by witnessing what's going on today in so many places around the world?
Yes, and thank you for that question, because it's good to talk up, in concepts and in abstract, but it's also good to bring it back to right here, right now. And one of the things that I'm telling people every day this time, and we did that during the pandemic as well, is come back to your breath. And I thought this is a very simple thing, but it's major. When we are scared, when we are anxious, when we feel threatened, we forget to breathe. And when we are breathing with calmness, with consciousness, with mindfulness, we are sending the message to our bodies that everything is okay, that we don't have to be in alarm, we don't have to be in survival mode. So come back to your breathing. Do breathing exercises every day. Take 5-10 minutes to breathe. That's one thing. The second thing, the body keeps the score. What does that mean? That if we allow all the videos and the images and the news every day to be absorbed by our bodies, we're going to have them stuck in our muscles, in our cells, in our as part of the way our bodies work. And it's very important that we let that go through us and outside of ourselves. How do we do that? By moving, shaking, running, walking, dancing, swimming. Do Zumba, yoga, do whatever you want, but move your body. You want, whatever you're absorbing to get it out of your system, because you don't want this to stay stuck in your body, because that's what happens. You develop all kinds of symptoms and illnesses, and you don't want that to happen. The third thing, and this is crucial, you mentioned it, Luis, before, is reach out to people. This is the moment that we know from research that connectivity, social connection, sharing in social environments, sitting at a cafe and just talking to people is extremely healing. Do not isolate yourself. Do not stay closed up with your feelings, with your thoughts, with your worries. Go out into the world. Call people that you know. Reach out, get out of your house and socialize. Even with people that you don't know, because everybody's talking about it. So just go and talk. Not only that, I'm going to take a step further even. If you know people that might be needing something, go and be an active member of society, and go do a donation, go help at a center that is providing food. Call a friend that you know has family that is in stress, and be there for them. Being actively helping is the best medicine always. I use it for myself. Every time I give talks, every time I'm seeing patients, I'm so grateful, and I'm so deeply grateful that I can do that, because it helps me with my own suffering and my own anxiety, right? In my own trauma. And then the other thing is using nature, music, creativity, and imagination, because is the antidote to trauma. The antidote of suffering is creativity and imagination. So use the arts, use music, art, dancing, and allow yourself to express in those ways. So that's a little bit of the things that we can do. There's a lot more. Listen to this kind of talks, that creates community.
I love it. Actually, everything you say sounds like the World Happiness Fest. That's what we try to do there.
I'm part of it.
So everybody is super welcome to join this community of amazing people such as Edith Shiro. I see one really interesting question from Abraham Francis. He's an associate professor at James Cook University. So what he's asking is, what is the one thing that I could do to promote collective healing in communities? How do we actually start with community healing?
So I love, Abraham, thank you for that question. If you have the capacity to open for whole, ¿cómo se dice eso? Like, go to the center of town.
Yeah, the town hall.
The town hall, and say, I know we're all going through difficulty. Can we sit down and have a conversation? Let's open up do a virtual meeting with people in your community, just to check with each other. Go check with each other what's happening to your neighbor. Have a meeting in your building, in your, in the neighborhood that you're in. Open for, like, bring food or bring music or something that people are attracted, and then create these spaces of connection. That's how you can start healing, because people are alone and isolated with their thoughts in their homes. So when you open up for open spaces to talk, just to check with each other, you don't have to solve political problems. You don't have to decide who's right and who's wrong, but just to be able to say, oh, wow, I heard something interesting today. Oh, wow, I see that my neighbor is as anxious as I am. Oh, wow, this other person really needed, a little bit of the cake that I made today that I'm going to share. These are all very, very important moments that we should not underestimate, because those kind of social community connections is what really creates healing. This is how we begin healing. So if you can do that, I'm telling you, you're already doing a lot.
Wow, thank you for the question. That was amazing. And thank you for the answer. So do you have a final recommendation before we close, for people who are watching, for those who really want to do something? What can they do?
Yes. Besides this idea of creating spaces of connection, either virtually or in person, I think it's important for all of us to remember our humanity. Really, truly, I say that. When you're thinking about sharing a video, sharing something to somebody else, when you think before you're going to share. Are you spreading hatred? Are you spreading revenge? Are you spreading more anger and more violence when you're seeing things on your phone, when you're sharing it with other people? Really be mindful of what you're doing, because everything that we do has a ripple effect around us. Everything, every word that we say, every action that we take, we are human beings, we're spiritual beings, all of us, and we have to take responsibility for our place in the world. And it's in all of us to make a difference. So the more that we're connected with our humanity, the more that we advocate for for being a human being that has feelings, that is sensitive, that it's not indifferent or desensitized with what's happening. The more you see the other with empathy and compassion and not as an object, because that's what creates violence. When you dehumanize the other and you make them an object or an animal or anything that doesn't have feelings, then you become very violent. So the more we humanize each other, the more we stay in touch with our humanity, the more interconnected we are, I think the better. So this is my word. Please, please, please remember that. We all should remember that.
Well, I think that there is a word very important, is Ubuntu, and the concept of Ubuntu is I am because you are. And I feel that's exactly what you are saying about not dehumanizing and respecting everybody. So I am because you are. And something very important that we all here at the World Happiness Foundation, we really believe is that the only way to peace is peace. And this is a new narrative in many ways. I mean, we have many non-violent movements around the world, but being sure that if we want to stop the chain of revenge, the chain of perpetual chronic illness, we have to stop that. And the only way to stop it is being at peace. So it's difficult, but is critical in many ways.
It's called, in psychology, we call it, you become the transitional character. You become the person that stops the cycle of trauma from generations and generations. You can do this, and then from you on, there's no more violence, no more trauma, no more of that, vicious suffering. So I hope that we all become this character that stops the aggression and the violence, and we do peace with peace. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This session is recorded, accessible to everybody in social networks. So thank you so much, Edith Shiro, and see you very soon. Take care. Unexpected gift of trauma, Amazon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you. We'll keep talking.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Take care.